Welcome. You're listening to Detective Duo, bringing you tales from the golden age of mystery, adventures in the spirit of Tommy and Tuppence Beresford. Tap subscribe to stay with us and share where in the world you're listening from. The parish library at Sutton Mead smelled of beeswax, old bindings and rain-wet umbrellas. Somewhere near the front desk, a clock ticked with the prim precision of a spinster librarian, and each tick seemed to echo off the quiet wooden shelves. It was, in short, the sort of place that looked as if nothing truly interesting had ever happened there. That, of course, was precisely why Tuppence Beresford had decided it must be hiding something. She stood at the far end of the local history section, running her gloved fingers along a row of volumes in faded cloth jackets. Her hat, slightly askew from the walkover, gave her a determinedly adventurous air, an effect heightened by the way she narrowed her eyes at the spines as though they were suspects in a lineup. "Really, Tuppence," came her husband's voice from the reading table behind her, lazy and amused. "If you glare any harder at that poor shelf, it may confess to murder." She turned, smiling faintly. "One doesn't glare at shelves, Tommy. One inspects them. There's a difference." Tommy Beresford lounged in a chair, long legs stretched out, hat tilted at a rakish angle, pretending to read the Times literary supplement. "And have you discovered the guilty party?" As a matter of fact, yes. She drew out a book and held it triumphantly aloft. "The Black Tulip, Alexandre Dumas. Only, look at this." The volume was neatly wrapped in brown paper, the sort grocers used for parcels, tied at the edge with a sliver of library tape. No colourful dust jacket, no title art, no catalogue code along the spine, just the faded handwriting of Dumas. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Perhaps someone thought the artwork indecent. Dumas could be positively scandalous, you know. "Don't be silly." Tuppence peeled back a corner of the paper and sniffed. "The library keeps its jackets intact for centuries, Tommy. Miss Cribbins would rather see a borrower drowned in the river than let them deface a cover. And yet this—" She turned the pages delicately. "Someone's written in pencil." He stood and leaned over her shoulder. Tiny numbers ran down the margin of a page. 241, 16, 32, followed by initials M.A. and a faint scrawl. "Look beneath the leaves." "Well," said Tommy, "that's dashed literary of them. Do you suppose it's Dumas' gardening advice?" "It's a message." Tuppence's voice had lowered, that note of curiosity he had learned to recognize as the beginning of trouble. Why write a message in a library book, unless it was meant for someone else to find? Miss Cribbins, the librarian in question, appeared at that moment like an admonishing ghost from behind a shelf. "Excuse me, madam," she said primly. "May I help you with something?" Tuppence turned the book over. "Yes, Miss Cribbins, I wondered why this copy of The Black Tulip has been altered." "Altered?" Miss Cribbins blinked through her round spectacles. "Oh, that one. The jacket was damaged. We had to remove it for rebinding." "It hasn't been rebound," Tuppence said sweetly. "There isn't a new spine or label, just paper." The librarian coloured slightly. "We've had a shortage of funds, Mrs. Beresford, isn't it? One does what one can." Tommy closed the book with an amiable thump. Quite understandable. Libraries everywhere are under siege from rising taxes and falling morals. Miss Cribbins gave him a startled look, uncertain whether to agree. "Quite." When she retreated, Tuppence whispered, "She's lying." "My dear girl, she's a librarian. They're born that way." Tuppence gave him a look. "Librarians don't usually remove dust jackets by stealth." Tommy nodded gravely. "Then what do we do, Inspector Beresford?" "Borrow it, of course. Under my name. She might notice yours." They walked to the desk, signed the card and listened as Miss Cribbins stamped the due date with excessive firmness. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavements gleaming and the shop fronts reflected in shallow puddles. Tommy opened the umbrella gallantly. "Another triumph for British sleuthing. We've borrowed a suspicious book." Tuppence ignored him, clutching her handbag close. "I've half a mind to examine every page for clues. Or perhaps you simply like the smell of conspiracy. Still, it's good to have a hobby." They crossed the street toward their little car. Neither noticed the man standing under the awning of the greengrocer's. He wore a tweed coat with the collar turned up and held a folded newspaper at chest height. Only his eyes moved, following the Beresfords as they drove away. That evening, in the cosy lamplight of their sitting room, The black tulip lay open between them on the table beside the teapot. Tuppence had changed into a soft cardigan. Tommy had changed into patient amusement. She had already filled half a notebook with scribbled theories. "It's a code," she said. "The numbers must correspond to pages, or perhaps letters." Tommy sipped his tea. "Or possibly the catalogue system." Tuppence blinked. "The Dewey Decimal. Oh, Tommy, that's brilliant." "I was joking." "Well, I'm not. Look, 241, 16, 32. They could refer to other books in the library. Each number might point to another clue. And after that we shall discover the treasure of Sutton Mead buried under the non-fiction section." "Don't be so smug. Stranger things have happened. Remember the case of the blue geranium?" "I try not to. That ended with you falling into a greenhouse." "Accidentally," she said with dignity. "Besides, that was before we were respectable." Tommy leaned back, regarding her affectionately. "You mean before we discovered that respectability is rather dull?" She grinned. "Exactly." They pored over the pages, tracing faint erasures and penciled words that had escaped the librarian's eye. Some were ordinary notes, others indecipherable scrawls. But on the inside cover, Tuppence found a small, almost invisible mark. A capital A followed by a period and a flourish. "A signature?" "Initials, I think," Tommy said. "M.A., the same as in the margin." "And look, beneath the leaves, it's written twice. Perhaps a warning." Tommy considered. "Or an instruction. Leaves could mean pages or trees." Tuppence looked delighted. "Tommy, you do have a poetic soul after all." "Terrifying, isn't it?" The clock chimed 9. Tuppence closed the book with care, wrapping it again in its brown paper jacket. "We'll take it back tomorrow. I'd like to ask Miss Cribbins a few more questions, when she's not being so fluttery. And I'll ask old Wilkes at the pub whether our librarian has been seen in suspicious company." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "You're just looking for an excuse for a pint." "Quite right," he smiled. "But the best detectives always work better after moderate refreshment." The next afternoon the library was nearly empty except for Miss Cribbins at her desk and an elderly man asleep by the stove. Tuppence approached cheerfully. "I'm returning this, but I believe there may have been a mistake with its binding." Miss Cribbins looked up nervously. "Oh, that one again. I do wish people would stop asking about it." "Has someone else inquired?" Miss Cribbins hesitated, then pressed her lips together. "I really can't discuss patrons' habits, madam. It would be most irregular." Tommy, hovering behind Tuppence, murmured, "You see, a conspiracy of silence." "Do hush," Tuppence said under her breath. To Miss Cribbins she added sweetly, "You mustn't mind my husband. He's quite mad on fiction." "Indeed." The librarian's expression softened slightly. She smoothed her cardigan. "It's just that people don't understand. Some books are best left alone." Tuppence caught the tremor in her voice. "Why is that?" Miss Cribbins seemed about to answer, then shook her head. "I really must finish my cataloguing." They left, Tuppence thoughtful, Tommy whistling tunelessly. Outside, a gust of wind fluttered the brown wrapping still clutched in Tuppence's hand. "Tommy," she said suddenly, "did you notice her reaction? When I mentioned the book, she looked frightened." "Yes, which means she's either hiding a secret or a very overdue fine." Tuppence frowned at the horizon where the church spire rose beyond the rooftops. "The phrase, 'beneath the leaves,' perhaps it means something in her garden. She keeps that little cottage behind the churchyard, doesn't she?" "She does," Tommy said, "and I recall seeing quite a few tulips there last spring." They walked on in silence a moment. The afternoon light was beginning to fade. Lamps were being lit behind lace curtains. As they turned the corner, Tuppence glanced back toward the library. A man in a tweed coat had stepped out from the doorway lighting a cigarette. When she looked again, he was gone. That night, Tommy tossed his newspaper aside. "Well, darling, do we pursue this thrilling case of the mutilated Dumas, or do we retire gracefully before we're expelled from the Women's Literary Society?" Tuppence, seated at the writing desk, was copying the penciled numbers into her notebook. "I've decided," she said firmly. "We pursue it. Someone's used that book for a reason, and I intend to find out why." Tommy groaned good-naturedly. "I knew it. I married an inquiring mind." "You married an adventure," she corrected. "Besides, if we don't, we'll never know what was meant to be found." Beneath the Leaves. Outside, the village clock struck 10. The lamplight flickered on the brown paper jacket lying on the table, the faint graphite marks catching the glow like ghostly handwriting. Somewhere beyond the drawn curtains, footsteps paused on the pavement, lingered, and moved on. And in the stillness that followed, the ticking clock of Sutton Mead Library seemed to echo once more, counting the seconds to the mystery's first revelation. The next morning, over tea and a perfectly innocent excuse, Tuppence said. The morning after their library escapade, she sat at the breakfast table frowning thoughtfully at the marmalade. Tommy, in shirt-sleeves and good humour, was reading the Daily Express upside down, a habit born from long marriage and mild defiance. "I shall call on Miss Cribbins," she announced. Tommy didn't look up. "To confess you've scribbled in her books." "Don't be obtuse, dear. To return another book, one must maintain a cover story." He lowered the paper. "And what will you ask her, whether she's in league with Dumas or the Dewey Decimal System?" "I shall simply observe," Tuppence said firmly. "Women notice things other women miss." Tommy sighed, folded the paper, and reached for his toast. Just promise not to frighten the poor creature into shelving herself under murder mysteries. By 10:30, Tuppence was walking briskly along the church lane toward the librarian's cottage. Sutton Mead, that tidy cluster of honeystone houses, gleamed under a pale morning sun. The scent of cut grass hung in the air. A cat slunk lazily along the wall. Ordinary village life, she thought, but the most ordinary places often harboured the most extraordinary secrets. Miss Cribbins' cottage, the Laurels, was small and alarmingly neat. The brass knocker shone, lace curtains hung in perfect triangles, and a small painted sign by the gate read "Silence is golden." Tuppence smiled to herself. A librarian to the marrow. When she knocked, the door opened with a cautious creak, revealing Miss Cribbins in a lilac housecoat, spectacles on a chain, and a manner both fluttering and defensive. "Mrs. Beresford, how unexpected!" Tuppence held up a volume of Village Tales of Worcestershire. "I was passing by and thought to return this. You did say you liked visitors, didn't you?" Miss Cribbins hesitated just long enough for politeness to wrestle with anxiety. Politeness won. "Well, do come in, if you don't mind a little clutter." The cottage interior was a museum of sentiment. Every inch of wall was lined with framed photographs, literary societies, wartime fetes, school prize givings. A corner cabinet displayed china dogs and glass paperweights. The air smelled of furniture polish and rose sachet. Tuppence took it all in with a detective's discretion. "What a delightful room! You must have such memories." Miss Cribbins brightened slightly. "Oh, indeed. I do so like to keep things orderly." They sat by the fire, and the librarian fussed over the teapot with the precision of someone timing an alibi. "Milk first or last, Mrs. Beresford?" "Whichever reveals the most character," Tuppence said cheerfully. Miss Cribbins looked puzzled, poured milk second, and offered a plate of thin biscuits. Conversation began with safe topics: library renovations, overdue fines, and the lamentable state of modern reading habits. But Tuppence, watching the older woman's hands tremble slightly as she poured, decided to drop her pebble into the pond. "I've just finished that old Dumas novel, The Black Tulip. Fascinating story." The teapot gave a tiny clink against the cup. Miss Cribbins' face went quite still. "Oh, you borrowed that one?" "Yes. Curiously rebound, wasn't it?" Miss Cribbins blinked rapidly. We've been short of materials since the war. Some of the covers have perished." "I thought as much," said Tuppence easily. "Still, there were notes inside, in pencil." A beat of silence. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. "Notes?" "Yes, numbers, initials, and a line that said, 'Look beneath the leaves.' Such a peculiar thing to write, don't you think?" Miss Cribbins set her cup down with a tremor. "People scribble things in books. It's terribly inconsiderate." Her tone was defensive, but her eyes betrayed panic. Tuppence leaned forward gently. "You know, it made me wonder whether the book once belonged to someone you knew. There's a photograph there, on your mantel." She gestured to a silver frame, 6 people smiling stiffly in black and white, holding books as though they were trophies. Miss Cribbins, younger and sterner, stood beside a broad-shouldered man in uniform. "Oh, that's the old literary circle." During the war, we held weekly readings in the library basement. Kept spirits up, you know. And the man beside you? Colonel Arbuthnot. Retired now. Or rather, he was. He passed away last year. Tuppence's tone softened. I'm sorry to hear that. Miss Cribbins looked away. He was a great reader. Then, hastily, I really must clear these cups. When she rose, her composure had returned, but Tuppence could feel the conversation shutting like a drawer. She stood as well, pretending to admire a brass bookend shaped like a lion. You've such an eye for keepsakes. Each piece must have a story. Stories can be dangerous things, Mrs. Beresford, Miss Cribbins said quietly. People misread them. Tuppence met her gaze. And some stories aren't finished. The librarian gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I dare say they're better that way. Outside, the cottage door closed with surprising firmness. Tuppence stood on the narrow path, thoughtful. Across the hedge, a stout woman in gardening gloves was pruning roses. Good morning, Tuppence called. Lovely day for it. The woman, delighted to chat, leaned over the hedge. Oh, good morning, Mrs. Beresford. You've been visiting our Miss Cribbins. Poor soul had a fright last week. A fright? Burglary, they say. Someone broke in one night. Didn't take a thing, mind you, at least nothing she's admitted to. Found her front door open in the morning, trembling like a leaf. How dreadful, Tuppence said, masking her quickening pulse. Did the police come? Oh, yes, but they found nothing. Still, she's been ever so jumpy since. Keeps the curtains drawn at odd hours. I told her, I said, Elsie, you'll make yourself ill worrying. But she's a nervous type. Tuppence thanked her, made a few harmless remarks about roses, and walked slowly down the lane. The village seemed peaceful enough, children playing marbles, a milk cart rattling past, but to Tuppence it felt like a stage set, the curtains hiding something just out of sight. She stopped at the corner and glanced back. Miss Cribbins' lace curtains twitched, then fell still. That evening, back at the Beresfords' modest house, Tommy was on the sofa, pipe in hand, looking annoyingly complacent. Well, he said as she entered, did our librarian confess to being the head of an international spy ring? Tuppence removed her hat and gloves with deliberate patience. Not yet, but she knows something. She went white as paper when I mentioned the book. Tommy grinned. Perhaps she's allergic to Duma. Don't joke. There was a photograph of her wartime reading club, 6 of them, including a Colonel Arbuthnot. He's dead now, but I think he's central to this somehow. Tommy tapped his pipe thoughtfully. And the message in the book? She pretended ignorance, but she was terrified, and someone broke into her house last week. That sobered him. Broke in? What for? Apparently nothing was taken. Tommy sat up. That's never true. When people say nothing was taken, they usually mean something they don't want to admit is gone. Tuppence nodded. Exactly. What if the thief wanted that particular book, or whatever message it contained? He frowned. A message that never reached its intended reader. Precisely. She leaned forward, eyes bright. Suppose during the war someone used those library books to pass information, a code hidden in borrowed volumes. The war ended, the people dispersed, but one of them realized the secret still existed. Tommy smiled wryly. You do realize you're constructing a first-rate thriller out of pencil marks and brown paper. Tuppence ignored the remark. Colonel Arbuthnot might have been the intended recipient, or the sender. Miss Cribbins was part of his circle. Perhaps she kept the book safe, or thought she did. He sighed, surrendering to the inevitable. And what do you propose we do next? Break into the library and inspect every shelf? Don't tempt me, but I think we should learn more about the Colonel. There must be someone in the village who remembers him. Bill at the Red Lion will. He remembers everyone and exaggerates them. Perfect, she said briskly. You talk to Bill. I'll pay another call on Miss Cribbins. Casually, of course. Tommy chuckled. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I'm alive, Tuppence said simply, gazing out the window at the fading twilight. The war's over, and people want quiet lives, but quiet hides secrets. I can feel it. The lamplight softened her face, and Tommy watched her with affection tinged by unease. Well, he said at last, just don't get us banned from the library. It's the only place left in Sutton Mead where people whisper less than you. Tuppence smiled. picked up the brown paper-wrapped black tulip from the table and ran her finger over the penciled words once more. "Look beneath the leaves," she murmured. "All right, Mr. Dumas. Challenge accepted." Outside, somewhere in the darkness of the lane, a match flared, then died, a watcher's cigarette glimmering once before the night swallowed it whole. Tommy Beresford disliked paying social calls before luncheon, but the pursuit of mystery, like fishing, demanded patience and odd hours. He stood that late morning before the gates of Arbuthnot House, a once grand Georgian villa now surrendering gently to ivy and disrepair. The gravel drive was weedy, the brass knocker tarnished, yet the place still carried an air of stubborn dignity, much like its late owner. He rapped sharply. The door opened a cautious inch, revealing a woman with a capable jaw and a feather duster in hand. "Yes?" "Good morning," said Tommy with his best disarming smile. "I was hoping to speak with someone about the late Colonel Arbuthnot. I'm doing a little research for a Veterans Memorial article." The woman's expression softened. "Well, you'd best come in, sir. I'm Mrs. Rigby, the Colonel's housekeeper. Been here since before the war, I was." The hall smelled faintly of furniture polish and pipe smoke. Faded regimental flags drooped on the walls, and a pair of boots stood neatly beside a walking stick, as though their owner might step out of them at any moment. He was a fine gentleman, Mrs. Rigby said, leading the way to a sitting room where sunlight slanted through lace curtains. "Strict as a parade sergeant, mind, but fair. Died 6 months ago, poor lamb." Tommy murmured condolences, letting his eyes wander. Dust lay lightly over a clutter of trophies, books and photographs. Officers in khaki, a young woman holding a dog, the Colonel shaking hands with someone important in uniform. "You mentioned he'd been unsettled before he died," Tommy prompted gently. "Oh, unsettled, yes." Mrs. Rigby poured him tea from a chipped pot and sat opposite, eager to talk now that she had a listener. He'd sit in that study muttering about unfinished correspondence. Said he ought to have burnt certain things years ago. Never did, of course. Kept them in that blasted notebook of his. A notebook? Aye, small black thing with an elastic strap. He guarded it like treasure. After he passed, it vanished. The solicitor swore he'd never seen it. His niece accused the nephew blamed me, and I nearly handed him my notice. Tommy smiled sympathetically. "Family harmony, eh? The British inheritance at its best." Mrs. Rigby snorted. "The will caused enough rows for 3 funerals. There's a cousin in Cheltenham still writing letters about it." Tommy let her chatter circle back to the Colonel's habits. She spoke of evenings filled with brandy and old dispatches, of visitors whose names she didn't catch, of the Colonel walking to the library every Thursday like clockwork. "He did love his books," she said wistfully. "That study was his kingdom." "May I see it?" "Well, I shouldn't really, but since you're writing about him." She led the way down the corridor and opened a heavy oak door. The study was lined with books from floor to ceiling, their spines forming ranks of faded colour. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunbeam. On the large desk lay a magnifying glass, a dried-up pen, and a neat square of lighter wood on the surface where some object had been removed. Tommy's attention shifted to a shelf behind the chair. The books were arranged with military precision, except for one conspicuous gap, book-sized, between the black tulip and the scarlet pimpernel. He ran a finger along the edge. "You wouldn't know if a volume went missing recently." Mrs. Rigby frowned. "Not that I recall, though the Colonel did lend a few to Miss Cribbins at the library. Said she was cataloguing local authors." Tommy concealed a flicker of interest. How thoughtful of him. Aye, thoughtful and careless. You'd think those two were plotting a rebellion the way they whispered about their books. Tommy chuckled, thanked her profusely, and soon found himself back on the lane, whistling softly. The mystery of the black tulip was sprouting roots in every direction. Meanwhile, back in their sitting room, Tuppence had the library catalogue spread across the dining table like a military map. Her brow furrowed, pencil tapping against her teeth. "Tommy, you're just in time to witness the birth of a theory," she declared as he entered. "Splendid. Does it involve lunch?" "Patience. I've realised those numbers in the margin of the black tulip. 241, 16, 32. They're Dewey Decimal references." Tommy blinked. "I thought that was a train schedule." "It's a library classification, dear boy. Each number corresponds to a topic. 241 is theology, moral philosophy. 16 is bibliographies. 32 is politics. So the scribbler had varied interests. Or, she counted, each number could lead us to another book, a chain of clues hidden under librarians' noses. Tommy dropped into a chair. And I suppose you mean to march into the library and check every shelf? Precisely, he sighed. I should have married a woman with quieter hobbies. That afternoon they presented themselves at Sutton Mead Library, armed with an innocent air and a parcel of borrowed volumes. Miss Cribbins was nowhere in sight. A young assistant shelved books at the far end. Right, whispered Tuppence. Section 200s are over there. You distract him while I search. Tommy, resigned, approached the assistant with grave inquiry about the relative merits of detective fiction versus moral essays. Meanwhile, Tuppence darted down the narrow aisle of philosophy and scanned the spines. Her finger stopped at the Pilgrim's Progress, Dewey 241. Inside, she found a penciled asterisk on page 58, and tucked between the pages, a torn scrap of brown paper bearing the number 16. She felt a thrill of triumph. On to section 16, bibliographies. There she located a dusty guide to English authors, and between its final pages, another slip, this one marked 32. Her pulse quickened as she crossed to politics. The rise of European alliances yielded nothing, nor did parliamentary speeches of 1938. Then her eye caught war correspondence of the home front, its binding frayed. She drew it out and heard a faint rustle. A scrap of parchment had slid to the floor. She bent quickly, heart thumping. On the yellowed fragment was written, in faded ink, Sub folius veritas. She mouthed the Latin softly. Truth beneath the leaves. Tommy's voice startled her. Find anything enlightening in moral philosophy? She showed him the scrap. His brows rose. Latin again. That clinches it. Whoever left these messages had a classical education and too much time. It matches the phrase in the Black Tulip. Look beneath the leaves. Someone's been consistent. Do we tell Miss Cribbins? She'd faint. No, we keep this to ourselves for now. They slipped the parchment into Tuppence's handbag and returned the books exactly as they'd found them. As they left, the young assistant called after them. Closing in 5 minutes, Mrs. Beresford. Thank you, we're quite finished, Tuppence replied with her most innocent smile. Outside, the evening light had mellowed to gold. They crossed the square toward their car, Tuppence's mind racing. If truth beneath the leaves means what I think, there's something hidden, perhaps in a garden, perhaps within the books themselves. Tommy unlocked the door, and the missing book at the Colonel's house might be part of the same chain. She nodded. We'll need to go back. Splendid, he said dryly. I've always wanted to burgle a deceased officer's library. Back inside Sutton Mead Library, the assistant stacked the last of the volumes, turned off the lamps, and locked up. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the faint patter of rain beginning outside. Minutes later, the side door handle moved. It turned once, quietly. The door opened just enough for a figure to slip through, a man in a dark coat, hat pulled low. He moved swiftly to the philosophy section, a small torch beam gliding across the shelves. He reached the Pilgrim's Progress, drew it out, flipped through, then froze. The scrap of paper was gone. For a moment he stood motionless, breathing hard. Then he turned the torch toward the desk, scanning the ledger, the borrowing slips, the counter where Miss Cribbins had sat. His gloved hand brushed a register, paused on a name, Beresford, Mrs. Prudence. He extinguished the torch and slipped back into the night. At home, oblivious to the watcher's discovery, Tuppence sat curled by the fire, tracing the Latin words on the parchment with her fingertip. Sub folius veritas, she murmured again. Truth beneath the leaves. Leaves could mean pages, or trees, or even tulips. Tommy poured 2 glasses of sherry. Whichever it is, we're now officially in deeper than we meant to be. She accepted her glass, eyes gleaming. And you love it. He raised his in mock salute to unfinished correspondence, vanished books, and the eternal curiosity of Mrs. Beresford. Outside, the rain grew steadier, whispering across the panes like someone turning pages in the dark. That night, the alarm bell started ringing, not a loud, modern shriek, but a hesitant, metallic ringing that seemed to echo uncertainly across the village square before fading into the night. Tuppence Beresford halfway through a cup of cocoa, froze mid-sip. "Tommy," she said sharply, "that's the library." Her husband looked up from the evening paper, pipe in hand. "You can tell that from here." "Of course I can. No other building in Sutton Mead sounds so respectable when it panics." He tilted his head. Faint but distinct, the bell clanged again, followed by the wail of a distant police whistle. Tuppence was already on her feet, pulling on her coat. "Come along," she ordered briskly. "Do we have to?" "Yes. You're the one who said mysteries never happen twice in the same village. Well, you're about to be proven wrong." Tommy sighed, stubbed out his pipe, and followed. I'd hoped for a quieter evening, perhaps a domestic quarrel between the vicar and his roses. Minutes later at the library, the square still glistened under a fine drizzle, the cobbles reflecting the flickering light of a police lantern. Constable Jenkins, a solid man with a moustache of deep conviction, stood by the library door with an air of mild confusion. "Evening, Mrs. Beresford. Mr. Beresford. You shouldn't be out in this weather." "Don't fuss, Jenkins," said Tuppence crisply. "What's happened?" "Alarm went off, ma'am. Neighbour heard it and fetched me. Door wasn't forced, but one of the windows at the side's been meddled with." "Anything missing?" He hesitated. "Nothing at first glance. We're still, well, checking the shelves." Tuppence peered past him into the dim interior. The reading lamps cast small circles of light upon polished wood, and everything smelled of wet wool and old paper. The orderliness of the place made the disturbance feel almost sacrilegious. Miss Cribbins stood by her desk, pale and fluttering as a trapped bird. "I don't understand it," she kept repeating. "I locked up properly. I know I did." Tommy moved quietly along the aisles, eyes scanning the shelves. "It doesn't look ransacked," he murmured, almost surgical. Whoever came knew what they wanted. Tuppence's gaze followed his, and suddenly she drew in a sharp breath. "Tommy," she whispered, "the black tulip." The brown paper-wrapped Duma was gone. "Are you certain it's missing?" demanded Jenkins, scratching his head. "Absolutely," said Tuppence. "We returned it only 2 days ago. It should have been here, on this very shelf." Miss Cribbins wrung her hands. "Oh dear, it must have been the thief. Why anyone would want that book of all things." "Because it's valuable," said Tommy, with a quick warning glance at Tuppence. "Old edition, foreign author, that sort of thing." Miss Cribbins looked doubtful, but nodded. Tuppence's eyes flicked to the floor. Near the side window, where the rain had blown in, a small patch of mud glistened. Embedded in it was a single crushed leaf, its underside smeared with a dark, oily streak. She crouched, examining it. "Tommy, look at this." He knelt beside her. "Bicycle chain oil. I'd know that smell anywhere." She straightened. "Do you remember the mechanic, Peter Goff? He was hanging about the library on Tuesday afternoon." Possibly waiting for a customer." "Possibly not." Tommy turned to Jenkins. "Did you see any bicycle tracks outside?" "Can't say I did. Rained too hard earlier, washed most of the road clean." "Then I suggest we have a word with Mr. Goff first thing in the morning." Tuppence glanced at Miss Cribbins, who still looked shaken. "Try not to worry. We'll find your missing volume." "Oh, Mrs. Beresford," said the librarian tremulously, "I do wish you wouldn't trouble yourselves." Tommy smiled faintly. "Madam, my wife's trouble is tireless. You might as well ask the sea not to be wet." Morning came pale and damp. The rain had cleared, but the hedgerows dripped quietly as the Beresfords walked toward the village garage. It was a small, untidy place smelling of petrol and rust, with an elderly sign creaking overhead that read, "Goff and Sons, Repairs and Tires." Peter Goff himself emerged from beneath a lorry bonnet, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a wiry fellow in his 30s, with honest eyes that didn't quite meet theirs. "Morning, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he said, too quickly. "Something I can do for you?" "Just a little inquiry," Tommy said pleasantly. "We were at the library last night." "Were you now?" "Yes. Terrible business. Someone broke in. One of the books went missing." Goff froze mid-wipe. "Oh?" "Yes. The Black Tulip. Do you happen to know it?" He frowned. "Can't say as I do. I'm not much for reading." "Ah," said Tommy mildly. "Funny thing, though, you were seen near the library Tuesday afternoon." "Delivering a pump," Goff said at once. "Old Jenkins' bicycle. He asked me to mend it. You can ask him." "Of course. And did you notice anything unusual? Lights, perhaps?" Goff's rag twisted between his fingers. "No, nothing. I was only there a minute." Tuppence watched him carefully. His answers were neat enough, but his eyes shifted toward the side door of the garage, as though measuring escape. "Well," Tommy said cheerfully, "we shan't keep you, but if you do recall anything, say an odd visitor or a stray tulip, let us know." Goff managed a weak laugh. "A tulip?" Tommy smiled. "It's a flower, often found in mysteries." As they left, Tuppence whispered, "He's hiding something." "Undoubtedly," Tommy murmured, though possibly only his poor command of lying. That afternoon the village hummed with speculation. Word of the break-in had travelled fast. Miss Cribbins was reportedly quite beside herself. At 5:30, Tuppence stood at the sitting-room window, watching the drizzle return. "We should check on her," she said. "She was terrified last night." Tommy looked up from his notes. "If we call now, she'll make us catalogue the entire fiction section out of guilt." "Nevertheless, I insist." They found the library light still burning, but the front door locked. After a few minutes of knocking, Tuppence's concern sharpened into alarm. "Tommy, look through the window." He peered inside, then uttered a low curse. Miss Cribbins was slumped at her desk, motionless. Within the hour, the constable and village doctor had arrived. The doctor, a mild man with pince-nez and a melancholy air, examined the body while Jenkins stood by, hat in hand. "Heart failure," the doctor said finally. Tuppence's frown deepened. Something about the tea service didn't sit right. Poor woman must have been badly frightened. "Frightened by what?" asked Tuppence quietly. "There's no sign of a struggle," Jenkins said. "No theft either, far as I can tell." Tommy's eyes moved to the desk. A stack of index cards lay neatly arranged, and beside them a half-finished list in the librarian's tidy hand. Catalogue of recent donations, but a blank space showed where another sheet had been torn away. Tuppence noticed it instantly. "Tommy, the list she was writing." He nodded grimly. "Gone." The doctor replaced his spectacles. "She must have been working late. Perhaps the strain was too much." "Yes," said Tuppence softly. "Perhaps." But her gaze lingered on the small teapot by the desk. The cup beside it was overturned, its contents staining the blotter in a dark ring. There was something oddly deliberate about the stillness of it all, as if death had been tidied away. Outside, Jenkins spoke with Tommy in low tones. "She had no family," the constable said. "Just a cousin in Gloucester. I'll wire him tonight." Tommy nodded. "Did anyone see her today?" "The assistant, young Hollis. He left at 6. Said she was cheerful enough. Planned to finish her inventory." "Then whoever came after must have had a key," Tommy said. Jenkins frowned. "But the door was locked when we got here." Tuppence joined them. Then she let her visitor in. The constable looked uncomfortable. "You think it was the same fellow who broke in last night?" "I think it's possible," Tuppence replied, "especially since the only thing missing is a list of books, and one of those books is the Black Tulip." Later that evening, the Beresfords sat by their fire, subdued. The little room seemed unusually quiet. Even the clock ticked cautiously, as if afraid to intrude. "She was so ordinary," Tuppence said at last. "And yet she was afraid. People like Miss Cribbins don't die of fright without reason." Tommy nodded. "If we're right, someone's trying to erase all trace of that book. First the theft, then the librarian." She shivered. "It's monstrous. Books are supposed to hold stories, not end them." He reached for her hand. "We'll find out who's responsible, Tuppence. We always do." Her fingers tightened on his. "Do you think Peter Goff?" "Too soon to say. He's nervous, yes, but that may simply be fear of authority. Still, we'll keep an eye on him." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance. At last Tuppence said, "There's one thing that bothers me." "Only one?" "The list. Why take it? It wasn't valuable." Tommy leaned back, thoughtful. Perhaps it recorded something that shouldn't be there, an item connecting the Colonel, the book, and Miss Cribbins. Perhaps the thief realized she'd begun to see the pattern. And silenced her. He didn't answer. The fire crackled softly, and outside the rain began again, gentle, persistent, as though washing the village clean of secrets that refused to stay buried. From somewhere beyond the drawn curtains came the faint creak of a bicycle wheel. Tuppence rose, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tommy, did you hear that?" He nodded, moving to the window. But when he looked out, the lane was empty. Only the glisten of wet cobblestones met his gaze, and a single crushed leaf lay in the gutter, streaked darkly with oil. Inspector Marston of Mercester arrived precisely at 10 o'clock the next morning, smelling faintly of wet serge and authority. He was a tall man with a jaw made for disagreeing and an expression that implied the world would be tidier if people stopped interfering in police matters, particularly people named Beresford. He stood in the small reading room of Sutton Mead Library, hat under one arm, scanning the orderly rows of books as though they were potential witnesses. "Tragic," he said without emotion. "Heart failure, the doctor tells me. Sad business. Now, if we could all avoid turning it into a circus." Tuppence, seated primly by Miss Cribbin's desk, regarded him over the rim of her teacup. "Inspector, don't you find it the least bit curious that she died the day after a break-in?" Marston's brows met like disapproving cousins. "Coincidences exist, Mrs. Beresford. Not everything is a conspiracy. Some people simply have weak hearts." Tommy leaned against the counter, easy and affable. "Of course, though in our experience weak hearts often coincide with strong motives." Marston's eyes flicked to him. "Your experience, Mr. Beresford, concerns itself with private capers. This is a police matter." "Splendid," said Tommy. "Then you'll want to know about the missing list." "What list?" Tuppence gestured to the blotter. "She was cataloguing donations. The final page is gone, torn neatly out." Marston looked unimpressed. "Perhaps she misplaced it. Librarians misplace things like everyone else." "Miss Cribbins," said Tuppence, "would rather mislay her soul than a catalogue card." The inspector sighed. "Nevertheless, the doctor's report stands. Natural causes." As he turned away, Tuppence murmured, "How very convenient for whoever frightened her to death." An hour later, when the police had gone, Tommy and Tuppence lingered among the quiet shelves. The morning light fell pale through the windows. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air. Tuppence's voice was low. "Tommy, she didn't die naturally. I know it. Look at the teapot." Back at the desk, the same floral teapot and cup waited, only now the cup lay on its side. The cup had tipped sideways, its rim stained brown, but the pot itself gleamed oddly clean, as if someone had wiped it. Tommy bent, sniffed and frowned. "Smells bitter. Not the usual Assam." "Exactly," said Tuppence, "and there's that little bottle beside it." A small glass vial, half full of pale tablets, sat neatly capped on a folded handkerchief. The label read Digitalis, 2 daily. Tommy's eyes narrowed. Heart medicine. The doctor mentioned nothing about prescriptions. "And yet, here it is," Tuppence said softly, "placed perfectly, as if to be noticed, and to seem innocent." He straightened. "You think someone dosed her tea deliberately?" "She might have taken too much," Tuppence admitted, "but Miss Cribbins was tidy to a fault. She wouldn't have left her medicine out uncorked, and the cup overturned." Tommy considered. "You may be right. Still, we'll need proof stronger than intuition." "Then we'll find it," said Tuppence firmly. Their first stop was the village apothecary, a narrow shop smelling of camphor and beeswax, its shelves lined with brown bottles and faded labels. Behind the counter stood Mr. Cottrell, a thin man with spectacles so thick they seemed to magnify his sense of discretion. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he greeted nervously. "Sad affair about the librarian. Very sad." "Yes," said Tuppence. "We wondered, did Miss Cribbins have a prescription for Digitalis?" He pursed his lips. "Indeed she did. A mild dose. I filled it regularly." "And did anyone else purchase Digitalis recently?" asked Tommy. The chemist hesitated. "Well, now you mention it, someone did. Only last week. Asked for tablets over the counter. I shouldn't have obliged, but he said it was for his mother's heart." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "Do you recall his name?" "I'm afraid not, but I remember his hands, greasy, black under the nails, like a mechanic's, smelt of oil." "Peter Goff," breathed Tuppence. The chemist blinked. "Could be. I wouldn't swear to it." Tommy thanked him politely and guided Tuppence outside before she could interrogate further. The road to Garv's garage wound past the churchyard, its iron gate creaking faintly in the breeze. The sun struggled through thin clouds, casting long, watery shadows across the cobbles. "I warned you," Tommy muttered. "Our friend the mechanic would reappear in this story. Every good mystery needs one man with oily hands." Tuppence quickened her pace. "He bought poison, Tommy. Digitalis in unlabeled quantity. Why would he need it? Perhaps for a sick motor car. Don't joke. He raised both palms. Darling, if I stop joking, you'll start imagining murder at every petrol pump. But his voice lacked conviction. The garage stood quiet, the forecourt empty except for an abandoned bicycle propped against a wall. The big doors were ajar, revealing the gloom within. "Peter?" Tuppence called. No answer, only the faint ticking of a cooling engine and the smell of oil. They stepped inside. On the wooden counter lay a familiar sight, wrapped in brown paper, tied with a strip of library tape, the black tulip. Tuppence stared, stunned. "It's back." Tommy approached cautiously. Neatly placed, too, like a peace offering. She picked it up, turning it over. The brown paper was dry, uncreased, as though it had been handled with care. No jacket, no pencil marks visible. The mystery that had begun as curiosity now pressed cold against her skin. "Tommy, it's the same copy. I remember the crease on page 117. He glanced toward the darkened workshop. "Then our friend Goff has been busy, or frightened enough to return it." Tuppence swallowed. And yet he's gone. They searched the small office at the back, a desk littered with receipts, a pair of oily gloves and an empty teacup. No sign of Peter Goff. Tommy frowned. No coat, no tools missing, he left in a hurry. All was taken. He looked at her sharply. "You're leaping ahead again." "Am I? Miss Cribbins dies after a book goes missing. The man seen loitering near the library buys poison. Now the book reappears on his counter and he vanishes. It's not exactly the plot of a fairy tale." "True," said Tommy dryly, "though it does have a moral, never meddle with Dumas." They carried the book home wrapped in newspaper, setting it on the table between them like a sleeping serpent. Tuppence paced. If he returned it, why not to the library? Why here? Tommy lit his pipe thoughtfully. "Because he wanted us to find it. We've been asking questions, perhaps too many. If he felt threatened, he might have thought we'd protect it." "Protect what, precisely? A book or whatever secret it hides?" He shrugged. "Both, perhaps." She leaned closer, voice low. "Suppose someone used Goff as a go-between. The Colonel, Miss Cribbins, perhaps others. And now the messenger's frightened." "Or silenced," said Tommy softly. Tuppence stopped pacing. "Tommy, you don't think—" He shook his head. "Not yet. Let's see what else our precious Dumas is concealing." They examined the volume inch by inch. The margins were clean, the penciled codes gone. Someone had erased them thoroughly, leaving faint shadows of graphite when tilted to the light. Tuppence traced a fingertip across the inside cover. "They've tried to destroy the evidence, but not very well. Look, here, beneath the paper." She peeled back a corner of the brown wrapping. Beneath, faint but legible, were two stamped letters, M.A. Tommy whistled softly. Our mysterious initials again. And whoever erased the rest left these, a warning or a challenge. He nodded slowly. Either way, we're meant to know the game isn't over. Late afternoon dimmed toward evening. The Beresfords sat by the fire, the book between them, the quiet broken only by the tick of the mantel clock. Tuppence stared into the flames. "Do you ever think we're too fond of mysteries, Tommy?" "Constantly. And yet here we are, two middle-aged amateurs chasing clues through parish libraries." He smiled. "Better than bridge club." She laughed softly, then grew serious again. "I can't shake the feeling that Miss Cribbins tried to warn us. When she said, 'Some stories are better left unfinished,' perhaps she meant this one." Tommy knocked his pipe against the grate. "In that case, we'd best finish it for her." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Constable Jenkins, hat in hand. "Beg pardon, Mrs. Beresford. Thought you should know. The inspector's gone back to Mercester. But we've had word from the station up the road. They found a bicycle abandoned by the canal this afternoon. Belongs to Peter Goff." Tuppence's eyes widened. "Was he—" "No sign of him. Just the bicycle. And a box of digitalis tablets in the basket." Tommy exchanged a grim glance with Tuppence. "Thank you, Jenkins." When the constable had gone, Tuppence whispered, "Digitalis again. Either he was frightened enough to flee, or someone wants us to think he's guilty." Tommy nodded, which, in my experience, means he isn't. Night deepened. Rain began again, fine and persistent, tapping softly against the panes. The book lay on the table, its brown wrapping catching the firelight like old parchment. Tuppence rose and crossed to the window. "Somewhere out there," she said, "is a person who killed a quiet librarian over a secret hidden in a novel." Tommy came to stand beside her. "And tomorrow we find out why." She turned, her face half lit by the fire. "Promise me one thing, Tommy." "What's that?" "Whatever we uncover, don't let it end like her story did. Too neat, too finished. I want the truth, not the tidy version." He smiled faintly. "Then we'll dig beneath the leaves as always." Outside, the rain glistened on the road to the garage, washing thin streams of oil into the gutter, black trails that wound away into the dark like ink lines in a book still being written. It was the faint crackle of paper that stopped Tommy mid-page. He had opened the black tulip once more from habit than hope, when his thumb caught on something stiff lodged between the back cover and the binding. "Hold the light, Tuppence." She leaned in, candle stub in hand, the flame flickering gold across the table. The book's brown wrapping rustled as Tommy eased free a small yellowed envelope, its edges brittle with age. The handwriting was precise, elegant, and faintly blurred by time. "It's addressed to M.A., whoever our mystery correspondent was." Tuppence's voice was hushed. "Open it." He slit it carefully with a paper knife. Inside lay a single sheet of thin wartime stationery, creased and faintly scented with tobacco. The letter was dated August 1944. "My dear M.A., if this reaches you, the others have failed. The list is buried where tulips bloom, and only we three know the spot. Destroy this once you have read it, for he suspects, and he watches. Should I not return, remember the motto, sub folius veritas." Tommy read it aloud twice, the second time slower, as though the words might rearrange themselves into sense. "Well," he said finally, "that clears everything up beautifully. A list of names, tulips, and an ominous he. We're practically done." Tuppence's eyes shone. "Tommy, don't you see? The Colonel's tulip garden, Miss Cribbins, the Colonel, that wartime reading club. It's the same circle." He frowned. "You think they hid something? A list of what? Local collaborators?" "Or traitors," she said softly. "During the war, villages were full of little secrets. Perhaps they found one too terrible to tell." Tommy folded the letter again, carefully. And now, 20 years later, someone doesn't want that secret unearthed. They spent the afternoon sifting through Tuppence's notebook, which by now resembled a cross between a crossword puzzle and a crime report. Lines linked names, arrows connected clues, and the phrase sub folius veritas appeared at least 3 times, underlined with enthusiasm. Tuppence tapped her pencil. Miss Cribbins, Colonel Arbuthnot, Mrs. Faraday, and 3 others. That makes 6 in the photo. 5 are dead or gone, 1 remains. Tommy nodded. "Mrs. Faraday. Still lives near the green, doesn't she? The one with the dreadful lace curtains." "That's the one. She was part of the book club, and she must know what the Colonel meant by tulips. We'll pay her a friendly call." Tommy eyed her warily. "And by friendly call you mean interrogation under the guise of tea?" Tuppence smiled. "Precisely." Mrs. Agnes Faraday lived in a neat Victorian villa that smelt faintly of lavender polish and regret. The front garden, bordered with low hedges, was overgrown with fading tulips, the last stubborn blooms of spring. When Tuppence rang, the door opened almost at once, as if the occupant had been listening for it. "Mrs. Beresford, is it? I was expecting you," said the old woman. Tuppence blinked. "Expecting us?" "I've heard you've been asking about Miss Cribbins." Mrs. Faraday's voice was dry as parchment. "Do come in. The kettle's nearly boiled." Tommy shot his wife a look. "Told you it was an interrogation." The drawing-room was a mausoleum of the comfortable past, antimacassars, photographs, a clock that ticked too loudly. Mrs. Faraday poured tea with trembling hands but steady eyes. "Sad business about poor Elsie Cribbins," she said. "Heart trouble, they said." "They did," Tuppence replied, though one can't help feeling her heart was helped along. Mrs. Faraday's spoon paused mid-stir. "That's a dangerous sort of talk, Mrs. Beresford." Tuppence smiled lightly. "Perhaps, but we've come across something curious. A letter." The old woman set down her cup carefully. "A letter?" Tommy produced it. "Found in a book the Colonel once owned, dated 1944. Mentions a list buried where tulips bloom. You were part of the same circle, weren't you? For a long moment, Mrs. Faraday said nothing. The clock ticked. Outside, a pigeon cooed in the eaves. Finally, she sighed. You should have left that book where you found it. Why? Asked Tuppence gently. Because the war may be over, but memory is not. She rose and went to the mantelpiece, taking down the framed photograph Tuppence had seen before. 6 people in wartime dress, smiling with strained cheer. We thought we were doing something noble, Mrs. Faraday murmured. The Colonel organised us. A little reading group, he called it. In truth, we passed messages for the Home Office. There were rumours of spies in the district, German sympathisers sending information about convoys. The Colonel discovered a name, a list really. He hid it for safety. And this he in the letter? Tommy asked. Mrs. Faraday hesitated. Someone from the ministry, supposedly. But the Colonel came to doubt him. He said there was a serpent in our garden. Then one night, a raid, and afterward the notebook was gone. The next morning, he told us he had buried the list and destroyed the evidence, but he never said where. Tuppence's eyes went to the window, to the bedraggled tulips swaying outside. In his own garden, perhaps. Perhaps, said Mrs. Faraday wearily. But it brought us no peace. 2 of our circle died during the war. Another emigrated. The rest of us agreed never to speak of it again, until Miss Cribbins, foolish woman, started her cataloguing. Tommy leaned forward. And someone feared she'd piece it together. Mrs. Faraday met his gaze. You're clever people, Mr. Beresford. Take an old woman's advice. Stop digging. Some roots go too deep. Her hands trembled as she refilled their cups, slopping tea onto the saucer. Tuppence said quietly, You're afraid, Mrs. Faraday. The old woman gave a brittle smile. At my age, fear's a waste of time, but I value my sleep. They finished tea amid small, uneasy talk of gardens and weather. As they rose to leave, Mrs. Faraday added, almost as an afterthought, If you must go poking about, start where the Colonel kept his tulips, near the orchard wall. That's all I'll say. Outside, the air smelled faintly of rain and earth. Tuppence linked her arm through Tommy's as they walked down the lane. Well, she said, we've confirmation at last. The list exists, or did. And a warning to boot, Tommy muttered. You realise she as much as told us to stop. Tuppence smiled, which, as you know, guarantees that I won't. He groaned. I feared as much. Very well. What's the plan, General? Tomorrow we visit the Colonel's garden. Today we think. Tommy glanced back toward the villa. The curtains had moved just slightly as if someone watched them go. She's terrified, Tuppence. Not for herself, I think. For us. Then we'd better make it worth the fright. That evening, back at the Beresford sitting room, the letter lay unfolded beside the fire. Its edges curled in the heat. Tuppence traced the inked words with her finger. Where tulips bloom. It can't be metaphorical, can it? The Colonel was a soldier, not a poet. Tommy shook his head. Practical man. If he buried something, it would be literal. She reached for the photograph they'd borrowed from Mrs. Faraday's mantel, the reading circle. Behind them, faint but visible, were tulips in full bloom. Look here, she said. This was taken in the Colonel's garden. The same tulips. It's almost a clue he left on purpose. Tommy nodded slowly. So tomorrow we dig. Discreetly. Discreetly, she echoed, and armed with charm if the police object. He smiled. Your charm, my spade. For a moment they were silent, listening to the fire pop. Then Tuppence said softly, Do you think the Colonel killed for that list, or died because of it? Tommy considered. Perhaps both. Secrets have a habit of turning on their keepers. She folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope. Then we'll find what they buried, Tommy, and perhaps, finally, who they were hiding it from. Later that night, as the clock struck 11, a shadow paused outside their house. The figure stood by the gate for a long moment, watching the curtained windows. Then, with gloved hands, it slipped a small tulip petal beneath the door and vanished soundlessly into the dark. Inside, the fire guttered low. The envelope lay on the mantel, the candle beside it flickering once, as though stirred by a breath that did not belong to the wind. Remind me, said Tommy, leaning on the spade. Why is it always me who does the digging? Tuppence, kneeling primly on the damp grass with her notebook balanced on her knee, gave him an approving smile. Because, dear, you have the heroic shoulders of a pioneer, and because I value symmetry, I take notes you dig. He jabbed the spade into the soil with a grunt. The garden of the late Colonel Arbuthnot stretched before them, once immaculate, now an untamed tangle of nettles and goosegrass. The afternoon sun cast long, slanted bars of light through the overgrown orchard, touching rusted wheelbarrows and toppled clay pots with ghostly warmth. Charming spot, Tommy muttered. If I were a secret, I'd have emigrated years ago. Don't be flippant, said Tuppence. Mrs. Faraday said the tulip beds were near the orchard wall. And remember the letter, where tulips bloom. The Colonel must have buried the list here. Tommy lifted another shovelful of damp earth. Darling, it's mid-May, and the only thing blooming here is mildew. She ignored him, scanning the tangle of stalks. Look, over there. Along the crumbling brick wall stood a patch of faded greenery, its stems bowed and yellowing, the ghosts of tulips long past their glory. A row of rotting stakes still jutted from the soil like sentinels. That's it, she said quietly. The tulip bed. Tommy sighed and trudged over, thrusting the spade into the earth. The ground yielded reluctantly, clods breaking apart with the smell of wet iron and decay. Birds rustled overhead in the orchard, and somewhere beyond the hedge a dog barked indifferently. After several minutes he paused, wiping his brow. I do hope we're not desecrating some unfortunate pet. Tuppence crouched beside him, eyes alight. Listen. The spade had struck something solid, metallic, hollow. Tommy knelt and brushed away the dirt. A rust-eaten tin box emerged, its lid pitted and dull. Well, he said softly, either buried treasure or one man's very dull lunch. Tuppence's hands trembled slightly as she helped free it. The box was heavy, sealed with corrosion and time. Tommy pried it open with his pocket-knife. The hinges gave a reluctant squeal. Inside lay a bundle of cards tied with faded ribbon, and atop them a photograph. 6 faces staring up through dust and years. Colonel Arbuthnot in uniform, Miss Cribbins with her earnest spectacles, Mrs. Faraday smiling uncertainly, and 3 others unknown. Tuppence drew in her breath. The book club, exactly as she said. Tommy lifted the ribboned bundle. Each card bore a name written in wartime ink, some smudged, some nearly gone. He read aloud softly, Arbuthnot H, Cribbins E, Faraday A, Linton P, Curate, and, he hesitated, Gough P, our oily-fingered mechanic. Tuppence frowned. That makes 5. The 6th card's missing, said Tommy, holding up the torn edge where the last had been ripped away. They exchanged a glance. Someone took it, Tuppence murmured. Recently, perhaps. That would explain the gap in the box. Fresh tear marks. He replaced the cards carefully and studied the photograph again. If this was meant to be buried evidence, why keep a photo of themselves with it? Perhaps sentiment, she said, or perhaps guilt. The breeze rustled through the orchard. The faint hum of an approaching car broke the stillness. Tommy looked up sharply. Listen. A motorcar engine, steady and official. Tuppence glanced toward the gate just as it swung open. Inspector Marston stepped through, back again, right on cue, in dark overcoat and hat, his expression grimly composed. Well, he said, striding across the grass. What have we here? Tommy attempted cheerfulness. Afternoon, Inspector, doing a little horticulture. Marston's eyes moved from the spade to the open box. So I see. Unearthing evidence without authority is rather irregular, don't you think? Tuppence rose, brushing dirt from her skirt. We thought you'd appreciate our initiative. He bent over the box, gloved fingers brushing the photograph. Interesting. I'll take charge of this, if you please. Tommy's voice was mild. You seem remarkably well-timed, Inspector. Did the tulips phone you? Marston's lips twitched. I prefer to keep an eye on inquisitive civilians. Hand it over. Reluctantly, Tommy obeyed. The inspector lifted the tin, wrapping it in his handkerchief, a spotless square of linen that, as he folded it, left a faint smear of dark grease across his thumb, the same smell as the oily leaf from the library window. Tuppence noticed instantly. Her eyes narrowed. You might need a cleaner handkerchief, Inspector. Mechanic's oil, isn't it? Marston looked at her sharply, then smiled thinly. Garage dust, perhaps. I stopped there on the way. Of course, said Tuppence sweetly. On the way here. He met her gaze for a moment too long, then snapped the box shut. I'll take this to Mercester for examination. Do try to resist further archaeology. With that, he turned and strode back toward his car, leaving the scent of engine oil faintly behind him. Tommy watched the gate close. Well, that was subtle. Tuppence's voice was tight. Tommy, that was our clue. He's hiding something. He nodded. I saw it too. Same black smear as on the crushed leaf at the library. Our inspector's been playing with machinery. Or with Peter Goff's bicycle, she said quietly. We may have been suspecting the wrong man entirely. They drove back to the village in uneasy silence. The lane shimmered with late afternoon haze. Children's voices drifted faintly from the green. The world seemed far too normal for the secrets festering beneath it. At home, Tuppence paced. It's all falling into place, Tommy. The Colonel's list named 6 people. 5 we've seen, 1 missing. The Colonel, Miss Cribbins, Mrs. Faraday, the curate Linton, Peter Goff, and an unknown 6th. Miss Cribbins dead. Goff vanished. And now Marston, with oily hands, swoops in to claim the evidence. Tommy lit his pipe. If he's the missing 6th, he'd be rather young in 1904. Unless he inherited the guilt, she said. Perhaps a relative of one of them. He exhaled smoke thoughtfully. And Mrs. Faraday warned us to stop digging. I think we'd better check on her before someone else silences the past. They arrived at Mrs. Faraday's house as twilight gathered. The blinds were half drawn, one curtain fluttering in the open window. No answer came to the bell. Tommy frowned. She always answers quickly. Try the back. They rounded the side path where the scent of bruised lavender hung heavy. The kitchen door stood ajar. Inside, a lamp burned low, throwing uneasy shadows across the tiled floor. Mrs. Faraday, called Tuppence. No reply, only the steady ticking of the hall clock. Then Tuppence gasped. At the foot of the stairs lay a figure, crumpled, one hand clutching the banister, the other limp at her side. Tommy! They hurried forward. Mrs. Faraday's face was pale against the carpet. Her eyes fluttered open as they knelt beside her. Careful, murmured Tuppence. Don't move her. The old woman's lips trembled. He came, looking for you. Who, Mrs. Faraday? Who came? Her breath rattled. Not the Colonel. Her eyes opened wide, unfocused. The curate. Then she sagged back into unconsciousness. Tommy lifted his head grimly. We need the doctor, now. Tuppence rose, half running to the telephone in the hall. But as she dialed, her eyes fell on the small side table near the door. A faint smudge of oil darkened the polished surface. She stared at it for a long moment, the receiver cold in her hand. An hour later, the doctor had carried out his duties. She's alive, thank heaven, he said, wiping his hands. Concussion, possibly a fall. Hard to say if she was pushed. Hard to prove, too, Tommy muttered. She'll need rest, no excitement. The doctor departed with brisk sympathy. Tuppence stood by the window, arms folded. Outside, the lane glimmered under the street lamps, empty and silent. The curate, she whispered. Mrs. Faraday said the curate. Tommy frowned. Linton? The mild little man with the stammer? He couldn't hurt a fly. Precisely the sort people overlook. She must have known something. Perhaps he wasn't as harmless as he looked. He nodded slowly. We'll pay him a visit first thing tomorrow, but before that, there's something else to consider. Marston's handkerchief. If he's involved, we're walking a tightrope between 2 culprits. Tuppence turned back, her eyes fierce. Then we'll use one to expose the other. That night, neither slept much. The tin box, the names, the missing card, all circled in their thoughts like restless ghosts. Tommy dozed by the dying fire while Tuppence sat at her desk, the letter from 1944 spread before her. The ink had faded to sepia, but the words still glowed faintly in the lamplight. Where tulips bloom, sub folies veritas. Truth beneath the leaves, she murmured. But whose truth? From outside came the low purr of an engine slowing in the lane. Tuppence froze. Through the curtains, a beam of light swept briefly across the sitting-room wall, then vanished. She crossed to the window and peered out. The lane was empty. only the gleam of wet cobbles and the faint rustle of wind in the hedge. Behind her, Tommy stirred. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said softly. "At least nothing yet." The next morning would bring fresh questions, a shaken witness, and the curate's pale confession. But for now, in the quiet house on Sutton Mead Lane, Tuppence Beresford stood by the window watching the darkness, knowing the garden's secrets had only just begun to grow. The vicarage was quiet in a way that made Tommy's boots sound louder than they should have been. Its neat, ivy-clad walls reflected the pale afternoon sun, and the garden hedges rustled faintly in the breeze. Tuppence kept one hand on the gate as she peered toward the front door. "Pale, nervous, and evasive," she whispered, recalling Mrs. Faraday's words. "That's our target," Tommy smirked. "You mean the curate, not me?" Tuppence gave him a look. "Do try to keep up. We're about to meet history, and fear it may be trapped in human form." They rang the bell. Inside, footsteps approached with hesitant cadence. A young man in a clerical collar appeared, Mr. Linton, the curate. His face was drawn, almost translucent, and his hands twisted the edge of a handkerchief. Yes?" His voice wavered. "Good afternoon, Mr. Linton," said Tuppence softly. "We wondered if we might speak with you about the library." He blinked rapidly. "The library?" Tommy stepped forward with a genial smile. "The one in Sutton Mead. We've been looking into the late Colonel Arbuthnot's garden, the book club, and, well, matters of history." The curate's shoulders stiffened. I don't know what you mean." Tuppence's gaze was steady. "Mr. Linton, please. We're not here to accuse you. We simply want the truth." For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes flicked toward the window, where the tulips swayed in the afternoon breeze, shadows flickering across the floor. "Sit, please," Tuppence encouraged. "I promise, tea will be served. Comfort aids conversation." He nodded reluctantly, settling into a stiff-backed chair. Tuppence poured him a cup, the faint smell of Earl Grey filling the tense silence. "I know it's difficult," she began gently, "but someone was passing messages through the library book club during the war. Miss Cribbins, the Colonel, Mrs. Faraday, all involved. We believe the Colonel created a list to protect others. Do you remember it?" The curate's fingers trembled around the teacup. I remember. I was involved, but not willingly. They coerced me." Tommy's brow rose. "Coerced?" "Yes. German intelligence. They demanded I pass coded information hidden in the library books. I tried to refuse, but threats." His voice faltered. "I was young, foolish, terrified. The Colonel discovered what I was doing. He created the list, not to punish, but to protect the others." Tuppence leaned forward. "So the list was never meant to harm anyone?" "Never," he whispered. "It was a safeguard, a warning. He said that if anything went wrong, the names would ensure accountability, but secrecy was vital. I was to destroy all evidence after his death, but someone else acted first." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "Someone else?" "Yes," said Linton, his hands wringing the teacup nervously. I was too late. The notebook, the list, gone before I could secure it. I fear it may have fallen into the wrong hands." Tuppence's lips pressed together. "And the black tulip, the letter, the tins buried in the garden." "They were intended to guide the trusted few," Linton admitted, "but the war changed everything. People moved, died, or were silenced. What remains is dangerous." Tommy considered. Then the message sub foliis veritas, beneath the leaves, was both literal and metaphorical. Linton nodded. "Beneath the leaves, yes. Under the tulips hidden from view. And beneath it all, the truth I could not face. For years I have carried it." Tuppence's voice softened. "We understand, Mr. Linton. You were a reluctant messenger caught between duty and fear. No one can fault you for that." His lips quivered, and for a moment he looked almost like a frightened child rather than the curate of Sutton Mead. "But someone else is still active," Tommy said. "The tin box, the missing card, and Marston's involvement. Oil-stained hands, mechanical interference. It's possible the inspector has used Peter Goff as an intermediary, or worse." Linton's eyes widened. "Marston? He faltered. Tuppence leaned in. "We suspect the black tulip, the tin box, and the papers have been manipulated. We need to bait the killer. We must create a decoy of the hidden list. The right person will take the bait. Tommy's tone was cautious. Which will reveal who has been controlling events since the Colonel's death. Linton swallowed. And the curate, he whispered. The he in the letter? Yes, said Tuppence. You were the reluctant messenger. But now the game has shifted. The real danger comes from someone who wishes to keep the past buried. He nodded faintly. I understand. I can help if necessary. Good, Tuppence said, voice firm. You'll remain discreet. Tell no one. The decoy must appear genuine. Tommy stood, tapping his pipe. We'll arrange it carefully. Marston must be unaware that we know about the tin box and the tulip patch. Linton's gaze dropped to the floor. And the garden? Yes, said Tuppence. The garden is the starting point. The tulips, the orchard, the soil, everything is part of the trail. For a while the room was silent, save for the ticking clock. Linton's hands rested around the cup, trembling less than before. Tuppence traced a finger along the envelope on the table. Do you remember the photograph? She asked. 6 of you in the club, wartime smiles. You, the Colonel, Miss Cribbins, Mrs. Faraday, Peter Goff, and one unknown. The 6th card torn away. Yes, he whispered. I know who it was, and why they were removed from the circle. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. You mean someone deliberately eliminated evidence to protect themselves, and they may still be watching? The curate nodded. Yes, I never wanted anyone to be harmed, yet I fear the consequences of what I left behind. Tommy laid a hand on Tuppence's shoulder. Then we act with caution and cunning. The decoy list will be planted. Whoever takes it will reveal themselves. Beneath the leaves, murmured Tuppence, eyes alight with determination. The phrase applies to hiding and revealing. Linton's lips quivered. I have never been so frightened, and yet relieved. You will ensure it does not end with blood, I hope. We will try, said Tuppence. The truth must come to light, but justice and safety will guide us. They left the vicarage in silence, walking slowly down the lane. The tulips, still faintly visible under fading sunlight, leaned as though listening to their footsteps. Tommy glanced toward the horizon. It's curious, isn't it? The more we uncover, the deeper the shadows grow, but at least we now know the curate's role and his innocence in intent. Tuppence nodded. Yes, he was coerced, frightened, trapped between duty and fear. Our pity must temper our suspicion. A slight breeze carried the scent of damp soil and fading flowers. She inhaled it, letting the smell anchor her to the moment. Tomorrow, we set the trap. Decoy list? Tommy asked. Yes, she replied. A copy of the hidden names planted in the library. Whoever takes it will show us the extent of their involvement and their desperation. He smiled faintly. I like it. Danger mixed with ingenuity. Exactly the sort of thrill I married into. Tuppence gave him a half smile. And you, dear, are the only one allowed to dig holes for evidence. He chuckled. It's a noble calling. Night fell as they returned home. The lamplit streets of Sutton Mead were quiet, the houses snug and ordinary. Yet Tuppence knew ordinary was a veneer. Beneath it, secrets lay like roots, tangled and unseen. They sat by the fire, spreading out maps of the garden, photographs of the book club, and Tuppence's notes. The candlelight flickered across the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to echo the whispers of the past. Beneath the leaves, she murmured again. It's both literal and metaphorical. The truth hidden in soil, and the truth hidden in hearts. Tommy glanced at her, pipe smoke curling around his head. Then we're ready. Tomorrow, we reveal what others have tried to bury. She nodded firmly. And we ensure the past is unearthed safely. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying faint scents of tulips and earth, as if the garden itself were keeping watch, guarding its secrets until the right hands revealed them. Following the curate's hint about a watcher with keys, Tuppence called on Mrs. Hogg, the Colonel's former housekeeper and now Sutton Mead's letter-holding landlady, who knows everyone's comings, goings and mail. The narrow hall of Mrs. Hogg's flat smelled of lavender and dust-polished wood, a scent Tuppence immediately associated with genteel deception. A vase of dried flowers stood in the corner, the petals browned and brittle, yet arranged with meticulous care. "Do come in, my dear," Mrs. Hogg said with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was a small, rotund widow, impeccably dressed in a lavender silk dress that matched the faint scent hanging in the air. The teapot, gleaming silver, hissing gently over the stove, suggested domestic serenity, yet the tight curl of her lips hinted at something sharper. Tuppence stepped inside, her coat brushing against the hall rack. "Thank you for having me. It's very charming." "Oh, I do like things orderly. And a spot of tea never hurt anyone, did it?" Mrs. Hogg said cheerily, pouring steaming amber liquid into delicate cups. Tommy, who lingered at the door, whispered, "You realize charming can be lethal in the right hands." Tuppence gave him a faint smile and followed Mrs. Hogg into the small sitting room, the furniture arranged as if for inspection. Everything was polished, every object deliberately placed, an impression that the inhabitant knew how to maintain appearances and how to hide secrets behind them. Tea was served with scones, butter and strawberry jam. The widow's hands, plump and steady, moved with practiced grace. "I hear you've been looking into the goings-on at Merivale," she said, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. Tuppence stirred her tea and sat primly, choosing her words carefully. "Curiosity, mostly. One tends to wonder about the people around them, especially when books, letters and small parcels vanish or reappear." Mrs. Hogg's smile broadened, a fraction too slowly. "Indeed, curiosity is a dangerous friend. You never know where it leads." Tuppence leaned forward, choosing tactful persistence. "We were told you once had connections to the Arbuthnot household." The widow's hand stilled over the teacup. For a heartbeat, her expression hardened. Then she smiled again, amiable but guarded. "Oh, that was a long time ago. I served as housekeeper to Merivale's late wife, many years ago." "Many years," Tuppence said softly, "and yet it seems you still remember every little detail." Mrs. Hogg tilted her head, inspecting the young woman as if weighing her for threat and truth. "One does remember, yes, particularly when one has been dismissed unjustly." "Dismissed?" Tuppence's voice carried no accusation, only curiosity. Mrs. Hogg's eyes flickered, brief and sharp, then softened. "An incident, you might say. A bracelet went missing, a trivial ornament, really, but the lady was particular and I was blamed." Tuppence's mind clicked. A stolen bracelet. So you were punished, but the lesson stayed with you. The widow's lips pressed together. Lessons stay. Memories, even more so. I learned which windows to watch, which letters to handle, and which secrets to carry quietly. Tommy, standing near the window, muttered under his breath, "Secrets, she says, like a fox in the henhouse." Tuppence ignored him. "So you understand people's habits, their weaknesses, their concealed actions." Mrs. Hogg's smile narrowed just slightly. "I observe, my dear. That is all." The conversation flowed on surface topics, the weather, village affairs, and distant acquaintances, yet beneath it Tuppence sensed tension, a coiled readiness behind the widow's seemingly benign gestures. "So," Tuppence said gently, "you must have seen many parcels and letters pass through the hands of Merivale's tenants." Mrs. Hogg's teacup paused mid-lift. "One must handle correspondence delicately. People reveal themselves in subtle ways when they think no one is watching. And sometimes that knowledge can be persuasive," Tuppence suggested, watching the widow closely. "Oh, I wouldn't say persuasive, merely informative," Mrs. Hogg replied smoothly. Tuppence leaned back, picking at her scone. "It's curious. We've discovered so many small irregularities lately. Letters arriving late, books vanishing and reappearing, all of which point to someone who knows everyone's habits intimately." Mrs. Hogg's gaze sharpened. "You shouldn't meddle in other people's correspondence, my dear." The words were calm, almost casual, but they struck Tuppence with the chill of certainty. The widow knew. She knew precisely how far Tuppence and Tommy had penetrated the network of secrets. "Do you think I would?" Tuppence asked lightly. "Only when it concerns the safety and truth of those affected." Mrs. Hogg's lips quivered into a faint smile. Safety, truth, such quaint notions, one might find them inconvenient. The air seemed suddenly heavier, the lavender scent sharp and cloying. Tuppence made a mental note of every detail, The placement of the chairs, the small key glinting under the lace cloth, the glint of her fingernails against the teacup. "You were dismissed," Tuppence said after a pause, "but that dismissal could have taught you much. Observing, collecting, remembering, even manipulating, if necessary." Mrs. Hogg's eyes gleamed faintly. "One does what one must to survive." "And sometimes to avenge," Tuppence said softly. Her gaze was fixed, unwavering. "A bracelet incident, punishment, all small injustices, yet they linger, shaping decisions decades later." The widow's face paled fractionally. "Are you suggesting I have held grudges?" Tuppence's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm suggesting that someone with access, knowledge, and long-held resentment might act carefully and coldly if presented with an opportunity." Mrs. Hogg tapped her finger against the teacup. The sound was deliberate, precise. "Opportunities come and go, my dear, and some things are best left untouched." Tuppence leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Some things, Mrs. Hogg, have already been touched. Letters intercepted, parcels diverted, a librarian frightened into silence. We know someone has been orchestrating events, quietly, effectively, with knowledge of every household, every habit. You understand these habits." The widow's fingers twitched, resting atop her lap. She said nothing for a moment, then exhaled gently. "You are clever, Mrs. Beresford, perhaps too clever for your own good." Tuppence allowed a soft smile. "We only wish to ensure the truth comes to light, that all secrets, long buried, are revealed." Mrs. Hogg's face hardened. "And in doing so, you risk harm, disruption, exposure. Some truths are dangerous." "I prefer to risk truth," Tuppence said quietly, "and justice." The conversation ended as Mrs. Hogg, with remarkable cheer, offered a final plate of scones. "You must try these, fresh from the oven, and remember, my dear, not all correspondence is meant to be read by prying eyes." Tuppence accepted one carefully. The crust was buttery, the jam sweet, yet every bite carried the weight of subtle menace, a reminder that the woman across the table was aware of the full extent of their investigation. Tommy, ever watchful, murmured, "I think she knows we're onto her." "Yes," Tuppence said, nodding slowly, "and she wants us to be cautious, or afraid, or perhaps both." The widow rose, patting her lavender-draped skirt. "Do come again, my dear, but remember, curiosity must be tempered with discretion." They rose as well, and Tuppence's eyes lingered on the small flat, noting every detail. The teacups gleamed, the scones remained untouched, the scent of lavender clung like a warning. Outside, the village seemed to breathe normally, children laughing as they chased each other along the cobbles, a dog barking faintly in the distance. Yet Tuppence and Tommy knew that beneath this veneer, Mrs. Hogg's watchful eyes had already seen more than they cared to admit. "Tommy," she said softly as they walked down the lane, "she was once a housekeeper in Merivale's household. She knows everyone's routines, everyone's correspondence. She could have orchestrated all the small disturbances we've noticed, and more." Tommy adjusted his coat. "And yet, she has not yet acted openly. It's the patience of a strategist." "Exactly," Tuppence said. "She knows the reach of fear and curiosity, and now she knows we know." The lane darkened as evening fell, gas lamps flickering along the street. Tuppence's hand brushed Tommy's briefly. "We have to be careful, but we cannot stop. The pieces are falling into place, and Mrs. Hogg's knowledge, her access, is central." Tommy's lips curved slightly. "Then we plan carefully, and we wait for the next move." She nodded, eyes bright in the dimming light. "Yes, and remember, beneath the leaves the truth waits. Someone has been hiding it for decades, and I intend to uncover it." After the decoy list we planted was lifted from the library's returns tray, the arrest was swift, clean, and utterly unsentimental. Inspector Marston, his dark overcoat collar turned up against the morning chill, was led away in the presence of a few curious villagers, the silver handcuffs glinting briefly in the pale sunlight. Tuppence watched from the steps of the library, the neat rows of books behind her now silent witnesses to years of manipulation, fear, and secrecy. Tommy nudged her gently. "Well, that was straightforward. Too straightforward." She smiled faintly, keeping her eyes on Marston's retreating figure. "Sometimes the truth is simpler than the path it takes to reach it, Tommy, and sometimes the path teaches more than the truth itself." He exhaled, a thin plume of smoke curling in the cool air. "Next time, perhaps, we should tackle something smaller, like a crossword puzzle." Tuppence's eyes twinkled. "Ah, yes, but mysteries like tulips bloom again every spring." He groaned, but the corners of his mouth lifted. Later they made their way through the cemetery to the Colonel's grave, a small granite headstone set in a neat rectangle of earth and grass. The tulips in the garden beyond the hedgerows had long since withered, but in their place Tuppence carried a small posy of bright yellow blooms, symbols of loyalty and courage, long misunderstood, now restored. She knelt gently, pressing the stems into the freshly turned soil. Tommy stood beside her, hands folded, surveying the neat rows of other headstones with quiet respect. "Funny," he said, breaking the stillness, "that after all this, the greatest lesson is how far people will go for a sense of duty, even if it means bending rules, breaking hearts, or hiding in the shadows." Tuppence nodded. "Yes, and how some mistakes like these tulips lie hidden beneath leaves for decades, waiting for spring and the right eyes to bring them to light." They stood in silence for a few moments, the faint hum of the village beyond the hedges mingling with birdsong. Even in victory, the weight of what had been lost and misunderstood pressed lightly upon them. Mr. Linton arrived quietly, his clerical collar straight, hands clasped in front of him. He had resumed his ministry, the burdens of the past tempered by relief and absolution. "You've done well, both of you," he said softly. "I can return to my duties with a clear conscience at last." Tuppence smiled. "And thanks to you, the true story will remain intact. The Colonel's list, the messages, all now serve their purpose rather than linger as secrets." Linton inclined his head. "Indeed. And Peter Goff? You've spared him harsh consequences." Tommy grinned. "A minor adventure, a lesson in caution, and a reminder that honesty in the end pays more than fear." Tuppence added, "He was only following instructions, albeit with greasy hands." Linton chuckled. "Sometimes loyalty comes in unexpected forms." As they walked back toward the village square, the sun dipped lower, casting the graveyard in gentle golden light. Each shadow seemed to stretch and recede like time itself, and the wind carried the faint scent of tulips from the garden beyond the hedges. "Do you ever wonder," Tommy said, "if Marston truly believed he was doing right, or if it was only ego that guided him?" Tuppence considered. "Perhaps a bit of both. But in the end, what matters is that the truth emerged, and he cannot hide from it any more." They reached the library, the familiar brick facade bathed in the last light of day. Inside, the black tulip sat on display in its rightful place, the dust jacket restored to its original glory. Tuppence's finger traced the spine lightly. "Even the book has returned to its proper form. But notice this." She tilted the volume to catch a pencil inscription, faint and delicate. It read, "For truth, look beneath." Tommy squinted. "Ah, the final reminder. Sub folies veritas, literally and figuratively. Leaves, soil, hidden messages, and now a legacy of honesty." Tuppence chuckled softly, all hidden beneath years of fear, misunderstanding, and secrecy. Yet, as always, the right hands bring them to light. The villagers passing by the library paid little heed to the restored volume. To them, it was just another relic of an old collection quietly sitting on its shelf. But to Tuppence and Tommy, it symbolized the resolution of tangled motives, the exposure of hidden truths, and the gentle vindication of those who had been wronged. They lingered at the library entrance, watching the fading daylight filter through the windows. The smell of polished wood and old paper was comforting, familiar, and somehow triumphant. Tommy nudged her gently. "Well, Detective, that wraps up another chapter. Do you suppose next spring we'll have another riddle to solve?" Tuppence tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "If the world continues to hide its secrets, certainly. But for now, we enjoy the calm." "Calm?" he said with mock suspicion. "You mean until the next black tulip arrives in the mail?" She laughed softly, the sound warm against the hush of evening. "Or until the next secret blooms beneath unsuspecting leaves." They stepped inside, the library door closing behind them with a satisfying click. The display copy of the Black Tulip still rested on its shelf, spine straight, jacket pristine. Its pages held stories, messages, and faint pencil notations awaiting the next careful reader. Tommy leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath. "You know, Tuppence, I rather like this resolution. Suspense, danger, secret messages, and yet no one died needlessly." Tuppence smiled, her hand brushing over the inscription. "The past has been reconciled, Tommy. People forgiven, mistakes acknowledged, and the truth preserved. That is more satisfying than most endings." Outside, the wind stirred the leaves of the trees along the street. The library window reflected gold and shadow, the sun slipping slowly below the horizon. Somewhere in the air, faint as a whisper, came the scent of tulips, sweet, resilient, and quietly triumphant. Tommy exhaled a low whistle. "Well, Detective, I suppose we deserve a little tea and peace." Tuppence gave him a knowing glance. "Peace. Until the next spring, perhaps. And then, who knows?" He laughed softly. "Then the mysteries bloom again, eh?" "Exactly," she said, placing the Black Tulip carefully in the center of the display. The inscription gleamed faintly under the fading light. "For truth, look beneath." A quiet reminder, a legacy of careful observation, and the assurance that some truths, once unearthed, are eternal. They left the library together, stepping onto the quiet cobbled street. For once, Sutton Mead seemed ordinary, peaceful, unremarkable, yet both knew that hidden beneath the calm, stories lingered, waiting, like tulips beneath the soil, for attentive hands to discover them once more, and in that knowledge they found the satisfaction of a riddle finally solved. The post arrived on a Tuesday morning, ordinary and unremarkable, save for the small package that bore no return address. Tuppence tore the wrapper away with the precision of someone accustomed to secrets, revealing a book, The Black Tulip, same edition, spine pristine, dust jacket restored to its original glory. Tommy, reclining in his armchair with pipe in hand, raised an eyebrow. "I do hope it isn't a sequel to the last adventure. My nerves can only take so much suspense." Tuppence smiled faintly, running her fingers along the cover. "It seems the past has a sense of humor, Tommy. Someone, or something, has returned." Inside the book, pressed carefully between the pages, lay a single tulip petal, perfectly preserved, its color faded to a gentle amber. "And a note," she added, unfolding a small piece of parchment. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, deliberate, and slightly archaic. "You missed one page." Tommy whistled softly. "Missed one page? You mean to tell me we solved the entire mystery, only to find a forgotten page hiding in plain sight?" Tuppence's eyes twinkled. "Apparently, someone, or something, wants us to continue looking. Perhaps it is a challenge, or a game." She flipped carefully through the book, checking the pages for anomalies. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. Then she paused, noting a faint imprint of pencil marks, nearly erased yet discernible under the light. "A code," she murmured, "and it hasn't been solved." Tommy leaned over her shoulder, squinting. "Really now? After all that effort, someone wants to keep the game going?" She placed the pressed tulip on the table beside her, fingers brushing its delicate edges. "Yes, the tulip, again a symbol. Whoever left this wants to remind us that the story, or the riddle, isn't entirely over." Tommy shook his head, a grin tugging at his lips. "You're telling me we'll be unearthing clues and chasing shadows before the week is out? How charmingly exhausting." Tuppence laughed softly. "And yet irresistibly tempting. You know us too well, Tommy. We can't resist a challenge, especially one wrapped in tulips, secrecy, and old books." The flat was quiet, only the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the faint crackle of the fire breaking the hush. Tuppence placed the tulip petal and the note atop her notebook, as if they were sacred relics, and examined the faint pencil markings. "They're almost invisible," she said thoughtfully. "The author or sender has left them deliberately subtle, not meant to be immediately deciphered, only noticed by attentive eyes." Tommy raised his pipe. "Attentive eyes. That's us then. What do you suppose the missed page contains? Another set of names, a secret message perhaps. Instructions for the next adventure. She considered. Perhaps all of the above. Or perhaps it's simply a reminder that some stories never truly end. Some secrets, like tulips, bloom again every spring, waiting for someone patient enough to uncover them. Tommy sighed. I should have guessed. There's no rest for amateur sleuths, only the gentle promise of more work, more danger, and more deciphering. Tuppence smiled. And delight, Tommy. Don't forget delight. Mystery is half its own reward. She traced the outline of the pencil code, tilting the page against the window light. The marks formed faint numbers and letters, partially erased as if someone wanted them partially hidden, partially visible, a whisper across decades. A challenge, she said softly, left for us to continue the story, perhaps the original sender or the final custodian of the Colonel's secrets. Tommy leaned back, pipe balanced in his teeth, watching her work. Do you ever wonder why people leave messages in books? Because books endure, Tommy. They carry words, secrets, and memories beyond their original owners. They hide messages for the right hands to find. And here we are, the right hands. Yes, Tuppence said, closing the book gently and placing it on the mantel. The dust jacket gleamed softly in the morning sun, its spine straight and proud. The black tulip has returned to its place, but now it carries an invitation, a reminder that our work, our curiosity, is never fully done. For a moment, the flat was silent save for the ticking clock. Outside, the village seemed ordinary, the post delivered, the morning sun climbing lazily above the rooftops. But within the small sitting room, a sense of anticipation lingered, like the hush before spring flowers bloom. Tommy glanced toward the book, then at Tuppence. You do realize, of course, that by tomorrow we'll be planning how to solve this new code, won't we? Tuppence's eyes sparkled. I do, and I'm looking forward to it. There's a charm in puzzles, Tommy, especially when they come with petals and pencil marks. The past never quite lets go. He groaned softly, shaking his head with a wry smile. You have an infuriating talent for finding excitement in the smallest of things. And you have an infuriating habit of following me anyway, she retorted lightly. We make a good team, despite your protests. Tommy chuckled. Indeed. I suppose we are condemned to curiosity, patience, and tulips. Very well. Let's see what secrets this missed page truly holds. Tuppence lifted the pressed tulip petal gently, placing it atop the page where the faint code lay. The aroma, faint but sweet, lingered. A symbol, Tommy, she said softly. Tulips. Loyalty, patience, secrets. They remind us that even long-hidden truths can reappear. Tommy peered at the code again, squinting. And we have to crack it. Of course. Why should it be easy? Because, she replied, some riddles are meant to challenge, not simply to be solved, and some stories, like people, resist tidy conclusions. He leaned back, pipe smoke curling. I do admire your optimism. I suppose it keeps life interesting. Yes, Tuppence said, placing her hand atop his briefly. And the world would be dreadfully dull without mysteries, Tommy, even ones that return months later with a simple tulip and a note. The camera, as it were, could linger on the library window beyond their flat, where the restored black tulip rested in display, dust jacket gleaming. The pencil note, newly visible, read faintly, For truth, look beneath. Tuppence traced the letters with her finger, smiling faintly. Even after all this, the riddle persists, a gentle reminder that the past isn't finished, and neither are we. Tommy exhaled slowly. So our quiet flat becomes a stage once more. I should fetch the spade, perhaps. Tuppence laughed softly. No, Tommy. This time we leave the digging to ink and imagination, and the occasional tulip. He groaned good-naturedly. You have a way of making intrigue seem charming. And dangerous, she corrected with a wink. Always dangerous. The afternoon light fell across the mantelpiece, glinting off the restored dust jacket. The pressed tulip lay atop the book, the faint pencil code below it, and a quiet promise lingered in the air. Some stories never end, some riddles bloom again, and the curious will always follow. Tuppence straightened, eyes on the book. Shall we begin decoding, Tommy? He smiled faintly, raising his pipe. After tea, perhaps. But yes, let the next adventure begin. Outside, the village continued its gentle rhythm, unaware that secrets, tulips and pencil marks had returned to challenge the cleverest minds in Sutton Mead. And in the flat above the quiet street, two detectives smiled at the promise of spring, knowing the riddle of the black tulip was not yet finished.